This is Robotic Disclosure, the podcast that reveals everything you want to know about robotic surgery, robotic technology, and how to run a best practice program for your hospital, your surgeons, and your patients. I'm your host, Josh Feldstein. Support for Robotic Disclosure comes from Kava Robotics International, the leader in robotic program consulting, serving hospitals in the U.S. and around the world. Visit kava-robotics.com. We're joined today by Dr. Amit Trivedi, the chairman of the Department of Surgery, Hackensack Meridian Health, Pascack Valley Medical Center in New Jersey. Dr. Trivedi received his medical degree from Stony Brook Medical School in New York and is board certified in general surgery. Today is his second appearance on Robotic Disclosure, so we have an opportunity to finish our exciting discussion with him about the Senhance system. Dr. Trivedi, thanks so much for giving us a little bit more of your time. We're looking forward to getting through a series of additional questions with you today.
Always good, and thank you for having me back, Josh.
Well, we left our discussion last time talking at length about setup, and that really kind of set the stage for, I think, a little bit more focus now, getting into some of the instrumentation and adjunctive components of the technology. One question that I'd love you to speak to are the energy options, monopolar and bipolar. Are there any other advanced energy options like a harmonic? How does stapling get accomplished? If you could take us through all of that would be a great place to begin today.
I think we have to remember that the Senhance system is still in its infancy, and we have to be careful when we compare to other robotic systems that have been out for almost 20 years now, right? And I think there's a lot of room for growth in all of robotics. And I think that being said, the Senhance system at launch has been quite useful just from the get-go, and it's been able to let us do bariatric cases. In terms of the actual energy devices for the Senhance system, the ones that we've been using are the hook cautery, which is a monopolar, and that seems to be working well for things like gallbladders, right? And then I guess the next level higher is that they have bipolar energy, which comes in graspers that you can just grasp tissue and similar to regular laparoscopy, just cauterize, which is nice. And that comes in handy in some of our GYN procedures that our hospital does. And as far as advanced energy, there is an ultrasonic or harmonic energy device, if you will, that has been just instrumental in our sleeve gastrectomy cases. And we use that or a combination of those energy devices in any typical case. And we feel comfortable switching out energy devices as the case calls for it, because the bipolar instrument, the hook cautery, they're all infinitely reusable until they break, essentially. And even our ultrasonic or harmonic type device has like literally over 100 lives that we can use before it expires. So we don't have a problem switching instruments during a case from a cost perspective, because it doesn't cost us anything extra. The instruments are reusable, which is, I think, one of the advantages that we should definitely touch on with this system. Because, as you know, with the DaVinci, it's 10 uses per instrument, and then the instrument has to be replaced. So for a smaller community hospital like ours, I think cost was a big concern, and these energy devices fit in well with that profile.
Can you speak a little bit about stapling and how that's accomplished?
Right now, the stapling that we do for our bariatric cases, we use our traditional stapling that we have in our hospital. Our hospital is a Medtronic hospital, so we have the Medtronic system for stapling, and we use that. The Senhance system does not have currently a stapling platform, but with port placement similar to laparoscopy, our assistant port is our stapling port as well. So I don't have to get off the console to go ahead and staple our sleeve gastrectomies. My assistant does it, and it works well right now. I think ultimately there will be a stapling platform with the Senhance system. We're not there yet, but I'm told they're working on it actively, of course.
You've spoken a lot about the adaptation of the laparoscopic surgeon to the Senhance platform, and from what I'm hearing, Dr. Trivedi, it sounds like the learning curve is pretty straightforward. Can you speak a little bit more about the learning curve for the surgeon after they have their basic training? What is the number of cases and the time frame, the process that you've seen take place for surgeons to get fully comfortable with the technology?
Sure, Josh. With any new platform, especially something as big as a robotic platform, there's going to be training required. And the Senhance system has been no exception, and the training's been actually quite good, which is a combination of background work, reading about it, watching cases, and then doing animal or cadaver labs or tissue labs and practicing with the unit. So once that basic training is done, then the company has a proctoring system where surgeons like myself go out to physicians in their hospital and proctor them to make sure that they have success with the unit and offer what we know, right? So initially when I trained, I was expecting really about 50 cases in order for me to feel comfortable with the unit. And that certainly did not pan out. Actually, by the time I did my 15th to 20th cases, we were ready to tackle pretty advanced cases, and we pretty much started booking anything that came our way that we would do laparoscopically with the Senhance system. Now, we're conservative here in the sense that just because we book it robotically doesn't mean we'll finish it robotically. We set aside a time saying, okay, in this case, I'll do an hour and a half worth of robotics, see how far I get, because I know it's, let's say, roughly a 2.5 hour case. And, we'll finish the case, get the patient off the table, give them a good operation, and then next time maybe we'll be able to do more. But literally within 15, 20 cases, by the 25th case, we were ready to do pretty much everything robotically with the Senhance system. So the learning curve is actually not that bad at all. And in fact, we looked at our sleeve gastrectomies. Now, this is all preliminary data, but compared to my DaVinci robotic sleeve gastrectomies, and I've been using DaVinci for sleeve gastrectomies for quite a bit of time now, we're only about 18 to 20 minutes more with the Senhance system, and that's with a new team, a new hospital, and a new me learning the procedure. So that's a small amount of time to invest in learning a new technology. It's not like people that are going to pick up this robotic system are going to be, required to spend 4 hours extra on a case. Probably once they get it down, there'll be only a few minutes extra, and our times are getting to the point where they're approaching my DaVinci times very quickly, and then that's parity. So that's a good thing.
Is there a different set of policies that you have relative to credentialing for your surgeons between DaVinci and Senhance at your hospital, or are they equivalent?
So generally speaking, we have a robotic credentialing pathway, and that basically applies to all the robotic technologies, Senhance, DaVinci, and it's basically required qualification degree, required qualification training, background courses, and proctoring for the first 3 to 5 cases at least to get off the ground. So once the surgeons have finished their basic requirement and get their certificate of training, they can work towards their proctoring requirements. So we've tried to keep it kind of a general policy so that as new robotic technology comes, we'll have some precedent. And it seems to be working well for us so far.
For privileging, Dr. Trivedi, do you have a certain minimum number of robotic cases for the surgeons on your staff to maintain robotic privileges? Do you have a set number? And it sounds like it doesn't vary between Senhance and DaVinci with regard to that minimum volume.
At the present time, our hospital system has a minimum of 20 robotic cases performed as primary surgeon per year as a requirement to maintain robotic privileges. And again, most of the surgeons that do robotic have no trouble maintaining that minimum number. So I think that's a fair number for now, and it seems to be working well for our hospital system.
Would that be 20 combined between the two platforms, or 20 per platform?
I don't even think we've crossed that pathway yet. I think so far it's been at least the 20 DaVincis, but I think it would probably be something that we'd have to cross when we come across that.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, at our Pascack Valley Hospital, we have only the Senhance system for our general surgery robotic program, and at the main campus, we only have the DaVinci platform for our, so it's exclusive.
Okay, interesting.
When we have multiple robotic platforms for general surgery across each of our hospitals, we'll have to cross that line with your question, and we'll have to see.
I may have to have you back to answer that one question. You'll keep us in suspense until then. Tell me a little bit about case selection. It sounds like any case that you would select for a laparoscopic approach, you would use equivalent for the Senhance system. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, with some caveats, of course, right? So what we're trying to do is we started off with a lot of bariatrics because that's what we do, and that's what the type of cases that come our way. And we've been very comfortable with the sleeve gastrectomy cases. So pretty much the sleeve gastrectomy cases in this hospital we book with the Senhance system as straight robotic, right? And like I said, our conversion rate has been nothing in the last probably about 25 cases. So that's a good thing. Now, for general surgery, things like gallbladders, even inguinal hernias, we've been booking with the Senhance system without any reservations. Colons and high-end paraesophageal hernias, things like that, we've been selective, and then certainly that's a good policy for patients. And selective means that we may do 20, 30 minutes of robotic, we may do an hour and a half in a 2-hour case, or we may finish the whole case. And as we get comfortable with the unit, as the team grows and gets comfortable with the unit, our expectation is to fully be able to do anything and everything with at least this system that we would do with any other robotic system. Let's put it that way.
Thank you. All right, let's talk a little bit about technique of surgery. This is something that I think you've addressed, and this may be kind of a recapitulation, but I'd like to kind of frame the question with regard to whether the technique of surgery, from your perspective, is more similar to laparoscopy using the Senhance system or to open. If you could address that question.
Right. The technique with the Senhance system is definitely similar to laparoscopy. The end effector instruments are very, very similar to what most surgeons are used to in terms of laparoscopic instruments. The hand movements that you have to make are essentially the same as the hand movements you would make in a regular laparoscopic case. The surgeon console was designed to essentially mimic and digitize laparoscopy. So the surgeons don't have to develop a new skill set as, let's say, you do with DaVinci, where you're kind of looking in the console, your hands are in front of you, and you're, turning your wrists a little bit to make the instruments move. This is more akin to laparoscopy, and that's why I think the learning curve has been relatively straightforward for most surgeons. Comparing it to open surgery is hard because the movements are so different, the instruments are so different. So I think that era is, we're trying to see it in the rearview mirror now.
Makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about suturing. So if we're talking about laparoscopy, are we talking about using instruments like tackers to avoid suturing, or is there any actual suturing that the user of the Senhance platform would be doing?
Yeah, so that was one of my fears. As a longtime DaVinci user, you get used to the wristed instruments trying to make ties and suturing, and I was like, well, the Senhance does not have wristed instruments at the moment. How am I going to suture? How am I going to, tie a knot? Yeah, I can do it laparoscopically, but what's the advantage of the robot? So I was asking myself, and then during one of my sleeve gastrectomy cases, the patient had a hiatal hernia, and I'm like, well, I have to fix this. And my initial thought was, well, we should just convert to laparoscopy and take care of the patient, of course. And I said, okay, well, we'll do that in about 5 minutes. Let me just see how much progress I make with the dissection. So 5 minutes went back, and I made decent progress with the dissection of the hiatal hernia. So let me give it another 5 minutes. And we kept doing that, and within pretty much an equal time that I would have, needed for laparoscopy, we had the hiatal hernia dissected and a good amount of intra-abdominal esophageal length achieved. And then the only thing that was left was to close the cural defect, to close the hiatus. And I said, okay, well, let me just give it my 5 minutes to see what I can do with a suture. And, we brought in the suture, the assistant brought in the suture. I grabbed it with the needle drivers that are available with the Senhance. And, then I thought, okay, this is just going to be like laparoscopy. I can stitch this in. But it was actually a little bit more. It was actually a fair amount more. The Senhance instruments, if you look at the handle, there's actually a dial on that handle. And what that dial allows you to do is to spin the entire instrument that you're holding in 360 degrees infinitely. You can keep spinning it around and around and around. And when you suture, you use that to your advantage. So what I did was I lined up the suture tip, the needle tip to where I wanted to suture, and then instead of using my wrist to drive the needle through, I actually used the dial. And the dial actually made a perfect curve right through the cura, in this case, for the hiatal, and brought the tip out to, tip of the needle out to where I needed it. And it just nice, smooth transition through the tissue. And then to grasp the needle, I used my other needle driver, grasped onto the needle tip, and then just used the dial to untwirl the stitch out through the tissue. So it was a perfect motion right through the tissue just using the dials. And then when it came to the knot tying, I actually used the dials to actually twirl my suture around the needle shaft and tie the suture down. And then certainly with the haptic feedback that I was getting on my hands, I was able to set the right tension on the knot without tearing the suture. And for that particular case, I did the whole repair unexpectedly in that case using the Senhance system and intercorporeal knot tying. And subsequently, we've had other cases where we've had to do intercorporeal suturing, and it's been not a problem. And while it's not fully wristed instruments, I didn't think you needed them. I think the advantage of twirling the instrument 360 gave you great needle passage through tissue and gave great advantages to throwing an intercorporeal knot and tying it down with the right tension. So I was actually pretty impressed with how efficiently I was able to do the suturing. Human wrist, you can't turn 360 degrees.
If you happen to have a video that we could perhaps link to this podcast that people could see to observe what you just described, I'd be happy to put it in the description because I think it is pretty interesting. I'm just curious, do you happen to have any of that captured on video?
We do, actually, and I was just going to suggest that we do have a nice video of suturing in a nice hiatal hernia, and I'd love to get that to you. That would be actually interesting for the viewers to watch because, again, it's something different than when you first look at the system at a conference or something. You're like, oh, how am I going to suture, right? When you watch this video, it's actually nicely laid out. So that's a good thing.
Great. Thank you for that. Let's go on to the next question, which is about the 5 millimeter and the 3 millimeter instruments and the advantages from your perspective, Dr. Trivedi, that the 5 and 3 millimeter instruments provide.
Right. So, as most people know, the traditional robotic instruments are 8 millimeter instruments, and the 8 millimeters are required for, obviously, strength, durability, and the wristed instruments that we're used to with DaVinci. Senhance is taking a different approach. They started off with 5 millimeter instruments. Even though they're straight stick, like I said, they all rotate 360 degrees infinitely, so that is an advantage. And the 5 millimeter concept lets you use your own hospital's trocars, so there's nothing else to buy. You just use standard trocars that you're used to. So that's an advantage right there. And obviously, the 5 millimeter incision is better than an 8 millimeter incision. And what's better than a 5 millimeter instrument and a 3 millimeter instrument? So we're just getting into our 3 millimeter realm, and we're going to start doing some 3 millimeter cases hopefully in the near future. And I think that'll have a lot of advantage to some of our general surgery cases, such as gallbladders, maybe even some of the bariatrics, and certainly our GYN doctors that are going to be using this are very excited about the concept of 3 millimeter, nearly scarless ports for some of their GYN patients. So that I think is a huge advantage to have smaller instruments.
Thank you. Do you see Senhance in every operating room to expand laparoscopy, or do you believe that it may be an alternative to replace DaVinci as a robot? I know that is not, strictly speaking, the way TransEnterix is positioning the technology. But again, as a user, I'm just curious from a clinical perspective, what are your views?
Right. So, I think that ultimately is the big question. And I think we think of it as a little bit differently. I think that we need to make a push towards digitizing the interface between patient and surgeon. And robotic systems, whether they're DaVinci, Senhance, TransEnterix system, the upcoming Medtronic system that was recently announced, the Google Verb, J&J collaboration, all of those systems will help. And what role they play, obviously, is being defined on a day-to-day basis. And from putting on, kind of a hospital admin hat and a surgeon hat, this is all actually a step in the right direction. I think cost in surgery in general and robotics is a big concern for most hospitals, most surgeons. And there's been a lot of pressure to bring the cost down. In our hospital, the cost of a Senhance procedure is far less than, let's say, the cost of a DaVinci procedure. And that's an advantage. But the capabilities of the two systems are very different. And sometimes you need a DaVinci, sometimes you can use the Senhance. And I think the way we position our robotic program is to say that there's a role for everything. We want surgeons to be able to use a digitized interface and use the right interface for the right patient. based on the surgeon's skill set and needs. So, for example, if you're doing a prostate, by all means, DaVinci's got an excellent track record. Please use the DaVinci. If you're doing something like a hernia or gallbladder, the cost benefit of a Senhance system that still gives you the advantages of a robotic system seem to be there. And you should consider that for the patient. And I think that helps. And we see these robotic systems that are coming into play as complementary systems, not competing systems. And I think that's the big picture that we have to kind of move medicine forward with, that they're complementary systems. They add to the repertoire, just like we have different surgical instruments, just like we have different laparoscopic towers and surgeons with different skill sets. If we grow with the concept that these robotic systems are extensions of the surgeon, the care that we can provide, and the safety features that they provide, the robotic systems provide, we can find a role for each of these systems. So in the future, I do see hospitals with multiple systems. I don't think anyone needs to be replaced or driven out of the competition. I think they can all add what their angle is. And it's up to the surgeon to kind of decide what's best, and up to the patient to say, okay, this is good for me as well. And the hospital can kind of steer the ship a little bit, saying, look, here are the costs. If that's a concern and the surgeon can respect that, given good data, they'll make the right choice. So I'm pretty glad that we have access in our hospital system to both the DaVinci and our TransEnteric system. And we're trying to help write that story, right? We're going to do our cost analysis. We're going to try to present some of our papers, some of our techniques, and let surgeons and patients and hospitals decide for themselves. But they have to understand that it's complementary systems that will have a role in each hospital, and it'll help contain the costs. It'll help divert some of the not high-end, where you don't need the ultra high-end robot that does everything. You can get something that does what you need it to do in a cost-effective manner. I think hospital systems just in the U.S. and around the world, have that concern. While we'd all love to fly in a Lear jet, sometimes you got to take, the commuter shuttle. And it's similar to that with surgery and robotic systems. And I think one of the things that excites me with what's coming up is the ability to integrate that augmented intelligence. That at some point maybe we can talk about that in a podcast at some point.
Thank you. We've been speaking with Dr. Amit Trivedi, the chairman of the Department of Surgery at Hackensack Meridian Health, Pascack Valley Medical Center in New Jersey. You've been listening to Robotic Disclosure. Support for Robotic Disclosure comes from Kava Robotics International, the leader in robotic program consulting, serving hospitals in the U.S. and around the world. Visit kava-robotics.com. Robotic Disclosure is produced at Northfire Recording Studios in Amherst, Massachusetts. Theme music by the Verve Jazz Ensemble, verve-jazz.com.